Welcome to Factory Forward, the podcast where we dive deep into the innovations shaping the factories of tomorrow. In today's episode, we're joined by Luis Solano, Manufacturing Industry Development Lead at Google Cloud. With over 3 decades of experience across industry giants like Microsoft, Conway, and Abbott, Luis brings a unique perspective on bridging the worlds of manufacturing and cutting-edge tech. In this conversation, we explore the future of AI in manufacturing, the real-world challenges of digital transformation, and how companies can stay competitive by leveraging cloud, data, and automation. From workforce evolution to cybersecurity and AI strategy, Luis shares actionable insights that manufacturers can't afford to miss. Get ready for an episode packed with vision, clarity, and practical advice on becoming factory forward. Now, meet your host, Zishan Zia.
Welcome to Factory Forward. Today we are joined by Luis Solano, Manufacturing Industry Development Lead at Google Cloud. With over 30 years of experience in manufacturing, supply chain, and digital transformation, including leadership roles at Microsoft, Conway, and Abbott, Luis helps manufacturers leverage AI, cloud, and automation to drive efficiency and innovation. We'll discuss the future of AI in manufacturing, the challenges of digital transformation, and how companies can stay competitive in a rapidly evolving industry. Luis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, C. Glad to be here, and I look forward to our conversation.
Luis, I find it really interesting that you started your career or you got your education in industrial engineering, and you're a hardcore manufacturing person. You've worked as a manufacturing leader at a number of top-notch manufacturing companies, but for the last 15 years, you've been at software companies. How did that come to be, and what do you do in these software companies?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So as you stated, I was an industry person. I started going through and doing some ERP work in my industry roles, like being the sponsor for ERP implementations, and kind of got interested in technology from that standpoint, and actually joined a couple of consulting firms to help them with that concept, right? So joining Microsoft was for me about how do we help manufacturers adopt technology in a much more effective way. Having been the sponsor of ERP projects, I know the challenges from a change management standpoint, from getting the requirements right. So I felt it was a good opportunity to kind of bring my industry knowledge to bear on that market. And frankly, when I first joined Microsoft, I thought I was going to be there a couple of years and then move back industry, but I stayed there almost 11 years and then moved over to Google almost 3 years ago now. So I think it's really about, the reason I stay is because the technology that I'm working with and helping our engineers and our brilliant technology people understand or figure out a solution for are trying to solve the same problems I was trying to solve many, many years ago, right? And that's the first thing I tell people about AI. Don't think of AI as a solution looking for a problem. It's a solution to the same problems you've been trying to solve in different ways for almost 30 years, right? And that's kind of the way I think about it, and then why I kind of jumped over to the software side.
Got it. Fantastic. I love that. Luis, switching gears, how do you, and you mentioned AI, how do you see AI transforming manufacturing over the next 5 years? And what role is Google Cloud playing in this shift?
Yeah, look, I think AI is going to be synonymous with manufacturing within 5 years, right? As I said already, I think it's solutions to problems we're trying to solve, right? So I think that we're going to see more and more companies adopt AI because it solves some of the big challenges that we're facing today. Things like the inability to hire a workforce, inability to retain a workforce, losing people a lot of experience. And so within that world, keeping in mind that we think AI is going to be synonymous with manufacturing, what Google is focused on is really just the data and AI part, meaning that we're never going to be in the ERP business, CRM, MES, SCADA. That's not Google's world, right? We're not an application development company. We're strictly focused on data and AI. And whatever ERP you use, whatever MES you use, whatever SCADA you use, we're going to make sure the data that is used by those systems is as good as possible for that particular process, right? And then secondly, yes, AI is going to be synonymous with manufacturing, but I think one of the biggest risks we face in AI adoption is people deploying different point solutions with different AI platforms. That's a big risk. AI should be deployed as a single platform. I'm hoping you choose Google, but at the end of the day, choose a single platform because that's what's going to drive innovation. These platforms are going to develop at different rates. If you find yourself with 4 or 5 different platforms or solutions built by 1 or 2 people, then you're going to be in trouble long term, in my opinion. So,
Makes sense. Luis, what are some of the biggest challenges manufacturers face when implementing AI solutions, and how can they overcome these barriers?
yeah, look, the technology works. I think that's the first thing I tell customers. Right, we're able to predict protein structures with AlphaFold, almost unsolvable problem, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Right, so the technology works. The only limitation is going to be about what data can you give the technology, right, and the quality of that data. So that's the first kind of barrier, right? I think manufacturers have been very focused on analytics, historically OE-based performance data, and that's where kind of the data they collect for. Where if you're talking about predictive maintenance, you're talking about quality anomaly detection, you need other data sets that you may not need for OE type metrics. So the quality data you have, connecting to sources of data that you may need for these use cases that you're not connected for today. You take a look at the typical ignition layer or MES layer or SCADA level data set. It's going to be about all the metrics, right? But the other data sets connecting to that. So you may have a machine that has a Allen Bradley Data Highway Plus from 1980 and a Slick 500 from the 1990s, or Siemens PLC. So this kind of hodgepodge of things is the reality of manufacturing. Very few people have a nice new plan with every single PLC being the same make and model across all equipment. It doesn't exist, right? So it's going to be a challenge. It's about the data quality and your ability to connect the data you're not connected to and get that to the cloud to make a use case viable for you in the long term.
Makes sense. You've talked about AI-driven automation in manufacturing as well. What are some examples, some real-world examples where Google Cloud has successfully implemented AI solutions on the factory floor?
Yeah, so I think that we have many customers in manufacturing. Obviously, I can't share any names, but let's talk about broad industries, right? In automotive, we have customers who are really trying to understand how to improve, cost job per hour rates and things like that in factories, struggling with hiring newer people. So we see a lot of use of things like vision AI to support the existing processes, right? Understand not only is there a defect in a particular part, but also things like overseeing a process in general, right? So I can take a recording of a person doing these tasks and say, analyze the person doing these tasks for certain steps that are either included or missing, and give me the feedback on that as an example. Yeah. So that's kind of the vision inspection AI is a big area for automotive manufacturers. On the food side, as an example, a lot of work around helping with food safety, using AI to understand, risk of contamination in terms of environmental areas, things like that. A lot of work on the consumer products goods side is really tying in customer-facing data with OT data and using AI to give you insights, right? So as an example, I had a customer complain on this particular product. Using AI to understand, okay, is this a pattern that's occurring out there? Is there a risk here that we should be addressing? These things are things that typically you've had a lot of data points to be able to say, I have a big issue, I have to go, find this stuff. Now you can use AI to say, here's a risk factor to this area, and maybe take action when you only have 4 or 5 data points instead of waiting for 1,000 data points, right, to solve things. So that's kind of things the areas we're working on overall.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Luis, you just mentioned, the growing workforce challenges in manufacturing as well. I presume you might be talking about aging workforce and high turnover rates. How can AI and cloud technology help manufacturers address these kinds of, workforce-oriented challenges?
Yeah, look, I think, in my opinion, by far the biggest challenge facing global manufacturers, but U.S. manufacturers specifically, right? I was talking to a customer 2 days ago who was building a new plant, and they gave me the target number of employees they expect to have to hire for that plant. And given where the plant was, and given that number was a very large number, I said, this is going to be your limiting factor to be able to grow this plant. There's no doubt in my mind, right? So a couple of things, right? The first thing is that I'm having trouble as a manufacturer in the US, you're having trouble hiring the people you need, right? Most people who are looking for new roles, new careers, new jobs are not thinking of manufacturing even as an option, right? Yeah. It's a universal problem, even with trade. So people aren't getting into trade jobs, let alone manufacturing jobs. So you have to figure out, how do I change this job so people think of it as something that's much more digitally focused or much more technology based, right? And that's the first thing. So AI is really about changing the way people work in manufacturing, right? The idea that I'm just going to be sitting here in this station on this particular line and doing repetitive tasks is not the reality of manufacturing in the future, right? You're going to be expanding the span of control of these people, and you use AI to help them be more effective with a larger base of technology or processes that they're overseeing. So that's kind of the first thing. So change the job to make it more attractive to people. So AI is a big help for that. The second thing is, once they're in the job themselves, once they're in the job, one of the biggest risks is that people tend to spend a lot less time on the job, 18, 24 months on average. You go to most plants today in the US, have been there a long time, you'll find people who've been in the same plant 25, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is, how do I make sure that when I hire someone, I can get them at full productivity in 1 to 2 months instead of 4 to 6 months? It's a big difference because that turnover rate is so much higher. So I think AI is the answer to that, right? AI is about how can you develop a training program that is tailored to the individual person instead of tailored to a broad range of roles, right? And then putting everyone through the same process. You can use AI to figure out how much is someone learning. Do I pull back on complexity? Do I add more complexity based on how they're doing with certain interactions? So that's kind of the second thing. And then last but not least, and you kind of hinted towards this, the other big risk is all the people with a lot of experience, the people I just mentioned who have been in the plant for 25, 30 years, they're ready to retire, right? Yeah. And so with them leaves all this unstructured knowledge, which is in their head. So AI is actually, even though it's kind of a weird thing to say, AI is a solution to that also, because you can use these people who have all this knowledge to help train these AI models, right? You train an AI model to do something. The model is going to ask for feedback. Is this the right answer or not? Whether using generative AI, even machine learning, right? So you're giving that model either through a data scientist directly to the model in Gen AI's case, feedback is a way to get that unstructured knowledge from people's heads into the actual model. So those kind of the ways that I think AI is going to solve the kind of the labor and workforce problem that I think is going to be critical for U.S. manufacturers.
That's really helpful. Really comprehensive answer, and I really appreciate it. Luis, again, I follow a lot of your content on LinkedIn, and you've mentioned that manufacturing will always be hybrid, both cloud and on-prem. You're working for the leading cloud provider. What are the biggest misconceptions manufacturers have about cloud adoption?
Yeah, I think that, look, I think that manufacturers, when they have someone selling them cloud, they hear things like, we'll handle all your data, we'll work with, the security. All those things are true, right, in many cases. But I think that the reality is there are definitely going to be hundreds of use cases in manufacturing that need on-prem capability at scale to work effectively, right? If you're running predictive maintenance as an example, right, you're certainly going to take all your data, train that model in the cloud, because you're going to use the AI services the cloud provides. If you do that on-prem, it'll cost you a fortune anyway, right? But once that model is trained and you want to now use it on the line, right? And the line, let's say the line is running at, let's say it's a bottling line is running at, 600 or 60 units per minute, right? You don't have time to go up to the cloud and come back down with an action in terms of, hey, there's something going on here, or eject the bottle if it's a quality defect model, things like that. So you need to have certain computer capacity or capability on the edge always, in my mind, because of these things, right? And so we see the inferences, which is the inference of the models that are running the edge, being a big growth area for manufacturing for that reason. And one of the things that we did as a company, understanding that situation, is that, okay, well, how do we deal with that? If you're going to have on-premise capabilities, is there a way to get the cloud on-prem? And the answer is yes. Something called Google Distributed Cloud. So Google Distributed Cloud is an appliance, essentially a server that Google rents to you. It's basically a series of cloud capabilities that go into this appliance. It's physically on your site. There are different versions of that based on your needs and capacity, but it's a way to give you some more flexibility, but it's still giving you the on-prem response times, what you need, right? And the other thing I forgot to mention as far as on-prem, the reality is manufacturing plants are typically found in very remote areas because they typically need a lot of land, and land is cheaper when there's less people around you, right? So you tend to be in very remote areas, which means that bandwidth is an issue, latency is an issue. So whether you have to do something like 5G or just stay on-prem because you're going to hit the cloud, those are all possibilities. So I think that's kind of the what I see happening with on-prem. That's why I always say it's always going to be hybrid. Certainly, there's going to be people who are going to be very skewed to the cloud. 95% cloud, 5% hybrid, but there's always going to be some percentage. And some people may be the other way around, 80% hybrid or 80% on-prem, 20% cloud. That's the reality of manufacturing.
Makes sense. No, that's a really cool example of the fact that factories are always, or most of the time, they're away from, a little bit far away from residential centers, and then you're just not going to have enough internet bandwidth in those areas. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Luis, I read that Google Cloud is now also part of the OPC UA cloud initiative. How do open standards like OPC UA impact the future of smart factories and interoperability between different industrial systems?
Look, I think that it would make things a lot easier if manufacturers as an industry try to adopt these standards at scale, right? And I think that history has shown us that we're not we being manufacturers, I kind of using the term broadly, including myself, because I think of myself as a manufacturer. We have not been very good or consistent about adopting a standard and sticking to it, right? We tend to say, okay, we start with the standard, we lose track of how to govern and manage the use of that standard, and kind of drifts away from the standard and becomes meaningless over time, right? But I think it's a valiant effort to try with OPC UA. Hopefully there'll be more adoption. There are other people doing other things, like Sesame is doing some work around asset level data models, certainly a lot of ontologies that are sub-vertical specific out there. So I think that wherever we can adhere to a standard and cover as many industry or companies within a sub-vertical of manufacturing at scale, the easier it is for solution providers to go after that market, help that market solve problems, and address some of these things. The skepticism I'm expressing is because we've tried this so many times, right? And we tend to do a great job of getting everyone involved, getting the round tables and the organization set up, and then we kind of like let it go away. It's never really adopted at scale, right? So hopefully this time it'll stick and we actually get to that level of adoption we expect with the OPC UA.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, you've been around obviously for 30 years in this industry. You've seen how these standards have come and go and how they've evolved, and yeah, that's helpful. Luis, another concern that I often hear is cybersecurity. Especially with the increasing integration of IT and OT systems. What strategies do you recommend for manufacturers to mitigate these kinds of cybersecurity risks?
No, it's an area of concern, and I'm happy to say that I've seen a big uptick in people actually dealing with these issues in manufacturing the last maybe year and a half now. So that's good, right? So a couple of things. Traditionally, the way people dealt with the OT environment from a security standpoint was to separate from the IT environment. And basically, I protect my ERP and my business systems, but because OT is separate, and we'll deal with that over time, right? The reality is, going forward, especially with AI and some of the Industry 4.0 stuff we're working on, other things, there's a lot of use cases that require the convergence of OT data and IT data, right? At scale to be able to enable these use cases. Something simple, for example, if I have a customer complaint that's coming in on my CRM, I want to be able to quickly figure out what sales order that product got to the customer under. That's in our ERP. I want to know when I fill the sales order, what inventory, that's ERP. When I made the inventory, what production order was used, that maybe my MES and combination ERP. So you get the idea, right? It's always the idea is these use cases are going to be comprehensive, and so you need to figure out, I need to converge these two data sets, and so separating out is not an answer anymore. So now it's about dealing with the security. So a couple of things that I think are critical, right? I think the first thing is if you have a manufacturing facility, you should have an OT security response retainer for every facility you have, meaning that you should have a contract established with Mandiant or some other firm that says, when this happens, I don't have to figure out who I'm going to call. I call these folks, right? Because hours matter in these situations, right? You need to be reactive. So I think it's a good insurance policy to have a retainer for OT security for every plant you own. The second thing I would say is that going forward, any new things you do in your manufacturing environment have to assume that it's going to interact with IT data. And so you got to have security built in from day one, right? You have to figure out, how do I make sure this data stream is corrected or correct, I should say, and secure at scale. And in many ways, especially with the AI use cases we're talking about, you're going to have to monitor the data streams all the time. Is this data correct? Is the data I should be seeing? Is there data missing and things like that? I think the last thing is that you need to understand what's your level of risk, right? Do you really understand and know what all devices that are on your network in the OT environment? Do you really understand access to all machine and equipment in your manufacturing floor across your plants? And one of the things I tell customers all the time, it's a little aggressive, but I tell them, I said, look, I guarantee you right now, if you go to one of your plants, you're going to have a piece of equipment that has a username and a password that someone can get on and do something with, right? Because that's what happens in manufacturing. I've got a vendor who supports this palletizer. The palletizer is always breaking down. The vendor is tired of coming. He wants to do it remotely. He creates a password. No one knows about it. And he's, so we have to figure out how to basically do an inventory and assess our risk of our current state and make sure, like I said earlier, our future state is already to a certain level. So everything we do from this point forward needs to have OT security top of mind, from my perspective.
Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. Luis, at IMTS 2024, we were there as well, and I, as I go through your social media, when you talked about IMTS, your experiences there, you talked about how manufacturers need a backlog of AI use cases prioritized by value and effort. Can you walk us through how manufacturers should approach AI adoption strategically rather than reactively?
Yeah, I think that, look, I think this is exciting time. Manufacturers see the potential of AI, but the bad thing of this excitement, if you have to point a bad thing, is that they're getting bombarded with people saying, hey, I have a point solution that can do vision inspection in a box, or I have predictive maintenance. Like if you just add these little magnetic sensors to your motor, I'll measure vibration and heat and show you these dashboards. And the reality is that it's very easy to kind of get hit the easy button and get brought in by these point solutions. So my suggestion is to step back, right? Step back and think about what use cases do I want to enable in manufacturing, and how do those use cases by themselves add value? If the answer is I don't know, then why is it a use case, right? I think we're past the days that you can develop use cases just to learn and just to play around with technology. People are spend a lot of money on pilots already, right? So that you should be identifying use cases that add real value to your business, and you can do it, basically do it for that reason, I should say. So I think that stepping back and saying, look, these are all my use cases, listing them out by business priority. What problems are going to turn solve? What's the value? What's the level of effort is an important exercise. The point of the list is not to say, I'm going to do this one first or do this one second. The point of the list is to give you a holistic view of what you want to accomplish all up. And then you start realizing that, hey, the sequence matters. Even though this use case is number one on my list, if I start with 3 and 4, number 1 becomes easier, right? Or by the way, if I do number 5, then I can actually combine number 7 and make check off both those things. You get a much broader view of what data sets you need, because it's going to all be about the data, right? At the end of the day, like I said earlier, technology is going to work. I'm not concerned about technology not working. AI works. It's going to be about data quality you can give it. And so if you look at use cases holistically, a list as a backlog, then you can figure out, okay, what do I really have? And I think the other thing I tell customers is there's not a linear relationship between data sets and use cases, right? What I mean by that is you can have 5 use cases, right? Enabled by 3 data sets. And you can add 1 more data element and basically knock off 3 more use cases, right? There are data elements that are so fundamental, they're a denominator, an equation, whatever the case may be, that if you get that, then other things fall in place really quickly, right? So that's why I say think about it as a backlog, because I want manufacturers to be much more strategic about it, understand what you're trying to accomplish, and then the sequence matters, like I said, right? You can figure out there's this path here. It's not just basically number 1 because it's number 1 priority. It's which one's going to give me value first, and maybe number 3 is higher priority than number 1 for that reason, right? Okay.
That's great. Luis, we are headed towards the end of the podcast episode. There's one question that I always ask my guests, which is a little bit cheesy, but what is the one thing manufacturers don't do enough of to be factory forward in 2025?
I think that for me, the number one thing is really not getting too bogged down by the fact that you have old equipment and I'm basically I can't do anything, right? it's not about getting you new data. What I tell customers today, I don't care how old your equipment is, let's figure out how do we get extra value from the data you have, not the data you don't have, right? We all want to get more data. We want that data to be clean and accurate and all those things, right? But the reality is you have what you have today. So don't let the idea that, oh, I have old equipment or I just have this historian data that I've kept for the last few years and I can't really do AI right now. There are use cases out there for what you have today. So start with that. I have customers tell me, well, I'm going to wait till I have all my PLCs on one brand and model, which is like, that's going to take, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So don't let your current state asset position, meaning it's old, you don't have a lot of information, stop you from experimenting with AI, right? Use the data you have, learn, and then work on that. It's a good way to learn, and also it's a good way to show value. So if you show value with the data you have, imagine what value you can add with new data, and that's the pitch to your leadership, right? To give you more funds to do more things. So that's kind of what I think about when I see people not doing things to move forward in the Industry 4.0 area. Okay.
Got it. Fantastic. Luis, it was fantastic talking to you. I really appreciate it. I learned a couple of things. And, we've just been talking for 30 minutes, and it's already really valuable, very information-packed session. Would love to have you again in a future episode, but thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks for inviting us, Steve. My pleasure. Okay.
And that's a wrap on this powerhouse episode of Factory Forward. If you love this episode, share it with your network and keep the conversation going on social media using #FactoryForward. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo and striving for excellence. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Factory Forward.